This conference will now be recorded.
Thank you. So welcome everyone. This is the October 15th, 2020 meeting for the Clatsop County Comprehensive Plan Update Countywide Citizen Advisory Committee. My name is Andy Davis. I am your countywide chair. If we can go around the room and introduce folks, I'd appreciate it. I'll go by the order that I see people on my screen and start with the folks that are in the advisory committee. Todd Lundy, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, yeah, I'm Todd Lundy. I represent the Southwest Coastal Group.
Thanks, Todd. Jan Mitchell.
I'm Jan Mitchell. I live in Astoria, and I'm one of the, I guess, the collaborative top sort of group. I don't know what we're called that makes us different from other people, but I'm one of those 5.
You're also my vice chair, should you need to take this over.
Right. That too.
Keep that in mind. Pat Corcoran.
Pat Corcoran. I also live in Astoria and am at the Countywide Advisory Committee level along Jan was referring to.
Thank you, Pat.
Jim Allegria.
Hi, I'm Jim Allegria, and I'm on the Countywide committee member.
Thanks, Jim. Cheryl Johnson.
Cheryl Johnson, I'm Northeast Clatsop CAC, and then also the liaison from Northeast to this big group.
Thanks, Cheryl. Phonetically similar name, Carol Johansson. Carol, if you want to come off mute and introduce yourself, you're welcome to, but I'll ask Viviana Matthews. It looked like you came unmuted, Viviana, but I don't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. It's Viviana Matthews. I'm the Executive Director of Clatsop Community Action.
Thank you, Viviana. Rachel Jensen.
Yep, I'm Rachel Jensen, Executive Director of the Lower Columbia Preservation Society.
Thanks, Rachel. And Gail, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, Gail Hendrickson, Clatsop County Community Development Director.
Okay. I think I've gotten everyone. It doesn't look like I missed a person yet. Carol, as I said, if you want to introduce yourself, just pipe up when you get the chance. So the next item on our agenda is review of the September 17 meeting summary. Any feedback for staff on the meeting summary as presented in our agenda packet for today?
Move approval.
That was Todd. Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah, that's me. Yeah.
Is there a second for that?
Jan.
Jan, thank you. And any objection to us approving the meeting summary as presented in our agenda packet? Okay, not seeing or hearing any. The agenda packet can be, or the meeting summary in the packet can be approved. Thank you. Jed Arnold, I see you there. Welcome to the meeting as well. I won't force you to introduce yourself at this point, but public comment is still coming up. And hi, Wendy, as well. CAC liaison reports. Gail, do you want to guide us through liaison reports?
Sure. So first up would be Clatsop Plain. I see that Mr. Strickland has not arrived yet, but the committee spent their time at their last meeting. I have to think now. What did we talk about? We talked about, I believe, groundwater resources. A lot of their time was spent focusing on the new issues that we are foreseeing over the next 20 years. And that's part of a larger transition in how we're trying to work the local committees, is that we want to present them with the list of existing policies more as a consensus or a consent agenda type of item where they can pull specific policies that they want to have further discussion on. The rest they can just approve by consent as a slate. And the reason for that is we're trying to get those groups to focus more on these future issues and spending less time on what happened 40 years ago and why certain decisions were made, even though that information is important because it helps to obviously inform the decisions that we're making for the next 20 years. But they spent a lot of time discussing their groundwater resources, the issue of septic leakage into the lakes there, Smith Lake and Neocoxie. Sunset, and then also talking about some of the groundwater implications from Camp Rylea and the activities that they conduct there at times. So that was their meeting.
Thank you, Gail. Do we have a Elsie Jewell Seaside Rural report?
Yes, so Elsie Jewell met following your meeting last month. They had a very small meeting group, and their meeting ended at about 6, but they did get through all their historic resource policies. A couple of items that they recommended, or sites that they recommended for the potential inclusion in the Goal 5 historic resources list included the Hamlet Cemetery and the Hamlet School.
Okay, thank you. And Lewis and Clark.
Yeah, and Lewis and Clark, they have been running, because their meeting falls after your meeting. They meet the last week of the month on a Thursday. So they've always been running a month behind the Countywide committee as part of this process. But last month they did meet and complete their discussion about historic resources as well. They were pretty much in favor of all of the staff recommendations and only had a few new items to add, which we'll see as we move on to later portions of the agenda. But it's touching on that issue of their meeting being held typically after yours and they're being a month behind. One of the things that you'll see on today's agenda is that it's a little bit different in how it's structured and the issues that you'll be looking at as a committee. And part of that is because we want to catch Lewis and Clark up to the rest of the groups so that all of the planning areas will meet before you have your countywide meeting to discuss a particular resource or topic. And so since the countywide committee did not get through all of the historic resources at the last meeting in September, this seemed like a good time to be able to kind of slow this committee down just a little bit for this one meeting so that now everybody is caught up and we can get back in sync and start moving forward. Later on, I'll talk about some of the changes that we've made, but that kind of ties into the Lewis and Clark meeting that was held in September.
Thanks, Gail. Northeast, Cheryl, can you report out of your group?
Our group met last week. We always meet the second week of the month, and we continued to work on Goal 5, and the focus that Gail gave us was groundwater, which includes watersheds and water resources. So we used the new process that Gail put together where we had a very clear worksheet, and the things that we were in consensus on, we were able to move through quickly. And then things that we had questions or concerns about, we spent more time on. And I appreciate the staff sort of, I don't know, compressing and clarifying our work. I thought it was a real effective meeting. I thought we got through a lot of material very effectively in a short period of time. So I appreciate that. In our discussion on groundwater, we also talked about the workshop, Goal 5 watersheds, wetlands, scenic and open spaces. From our group, I was one who attended that workshop, and I felt it was really worthwhile. I got a lot of information out of it. And groundwater, well, as with all our issues, but groundwater is so wide and so broad, I sort of felt like it gave us a nice foundation, a nice focus. Within that groundwater concept, we we were concerned that watersheds as a subtopic only has one goal, and we feel that watersheds is a critical resource. And in Clatsop County, the majority of our watersheds originate in forests, some of which are state-owned, some of which are privately owned, and yet there's only one goal there to protect those watersheds. So that was a concern that came up for us. And I think that's it.
Thanks, Cheryl. Todd, do you have a report out of your group?
Yes, we met yesterday, actually. And we quickly went over a set of objectives, or that is, pardon me, of policies for historic and historic and cultural. And then we moved on to groundwater, water resources, and watersheds. And we spent most of our time on domestic watersheds because of the importance along our coast down there of domestic watersheds. And the main thing was something what Cheryl was speaking of, that a lot of our watersheds have timber company ownership above it, and it's concern with the pollution of the water from spraying primarily, but also from other activities during harvest. So that was about it. That's all my report right there.
And Gail, you're sharing the recommendations from the Southwest group on the screen.
Yes. And
Oh yeah, oh good. I thought we'd get to that when we get to the cultural, though.
okay.
Sure, we can do that. Okay, thank you, Todd. Gail, anything
Thanks,
else to wrap up with on liaison reports?
No, that concludes that portion. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, so now we have a segment for public comment and input. We welcome public comment to this group. We do ask that you respect the time of everybody here, and I'll keep track of around 3 minutes. I'll let you know if you're getting to that point. If you need to run on just a little bit, that's okay, but we just ask you to keep it to a reasonable amount. So do I have anyone who would like to make public comment at this time? Rachel?
Sure, I'll go. All right. Rachel Jensen again from the Lower Columbia Preservation Society. And I apologize for not being able to be at the last meeting. I was traveling, but I did review all the minutes and thought that you guys are doing an excellent job, really digging into this topic, all of these topics. And I want to commend you also for your discussion about both the Chinook Nation and the Clatsop-Nehalem Confederated Tribes. I feel like that work, adding that inclusion is really important. And then in terms of the goal 5, like the inventory things that we had discussed in the past, I think that I don't know, and I'm sure that you'll discuss it more later in the meeting, but about the CLG, if you will be making a recommendation as a committee to the county specifically on like a yay nay on pursuing that designation, or if that's going to be I think the suggested language on the worksheet that I saw for today was that you would get public input to see if that was going to be pursued. And I would just strongly encourage that you take a stance of that, that getting that certification will actually, by doing so, you're going to hit a lot of those other bullet points that you've been discussing. Because, by participating as a certified local government, you will be participating in updating and expanding your inventories. With the State Historic Preservation Office, you'll establish a Historic Preservation Commission. You will adopt local preservation ordinances and encourage preservation of buildings. So if that can become kind of a strong suggestion on your part, if you agree with that, that will really take some of the inventory work that needs to be done and put it in a process that's already really well established and works hand in hand with the State Historic Preservation Office. So I just really encourage that. And then I think in addition to that, just considering a policy that has that deals with Clatsop County tax foreclosed properties if they're historic, how those might be addressed. I know that the City of Astoria in their comprehensive plan does address tax foreclosed by the city and how they address those properties if they are historic, as well as properties owned by the county, and making sure that you're addressing the properties that are in the county's possession and how the county should be addressing the use of those. And again, I look at the City of Astoria's comprehensive plan that addresses both of those issues. And I know Doug was going to hope to pop in. He had been at the last meeting, and he wanted to, as an example, just highlight the J.J. Astor Experimentation Center Station Farmhouse, the superintendent's house that's the county, that the fairgrounds owns. And we have a website available where you can look at the history of that building, just as an example of something that sometimes it's pretty far along in the process before you realize the significance of a historic property. So that's all I have today.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for that input. Is there more public comment or input at this time? Okay, hearing none, we can move on to the review of the Goal 5 topics that we've got left. So as you recall, last meeting, we got through a portion of the Goal 5 policy review section. That is the red worksheet. By my recollection and what it looks like in our notes, we're up to policy 6. Is that correct, Gail, that we were sufficiently through the other policies at this time to start up with 6?
Correct.
Okay. So policy 6, as you can hopefully read on the screen, is that the county will protect the historical character of the Tillamook Lighthouse, Morrison House, the Clatsop Plains Memorial Church, and the Westport Log Tunnel through appropriate provisions in zoning ordinance. I will note that the staff recommendation here was to change language in the policy around continuance of that protection, because that's already been implemented. Is that a correct reading of that, Gail?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Well, yeah.
And then it looked like most of the groups had recommended approval or retention of the policy. The Southwest group had slightly differing feedback. Todd, do you care to speak to that as far as broadening to include inventoried resources?
The inventoried resources list is rather long. I think if that's what we're referring to, Gail, is that the one with a couple hundred items in it?
Yes, the inventory list. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, go ahead. You go ahead.
Okay, so the inventory list included all the resources that are listed on the National Register of Historic Places that are included in the state inventory of historic sites. It included 90 unnamed archaeological sites and a list of historic cemeteries that's kept by the state. So there are, yeah, probably several hundred in there. Some of them, as we discussed at other committee meetings, are too vague, possibly in their descriptions, or may no longer have historic significance. One example that comes to mind is that the state inventory includes several sites that are simply listed as house and may or may not have a road, or maybe it's an intersection of roads, but nothing to specifically identify a particular site. So that would be one reason to maybe tailor the list a bit more, just because some sites are too vaguely described for us to be able to identify them if a permit were to come in, and to be able to take appropriate precautions.
My recollection is also that we didn't want to tackle a gigantic list, but rather not limit it to a dozen or so that are officially on the approved list now. And that's all that I recall about it. Is that about what you remember?
Well, I didn't attend your Southwest Coastal
Okay,
meeting.
no, that's my recollection. So I would say not the word all, but a additional selected inventory resources rather than the few on the existing list.
Do you have I mean, I don't necessarily want this group to get bogged down in detailed discussion about what
Items.
should be in this particular policy either, but was there criteria in mind, or?
No, I think we were overwhelmed by the size of the overall list, and
Sure.
my recollection is that kind of got dropped. I don't think we actually voted on or agreed to including all of them, except for that the approved list seemed rather short, and of course that's manageable.
Okay.
So the Southwest did make a few specific recommendations for possible inclusion in the county's plan. It included the Arch Cape Tunnel, a wagon trail that had been blasted through the area at some point in the past, Hug Point, and then the geological sites around Hug Point was the recommendation from the Southwest Committee.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that, Gail. Is there a notion from the group, or do you want discussion around what action to take on this particular policy 6? I will note and welcome Robert Strickland has joined the group. Thanks for coming along, Robert. Happy to see you.
So glad that my sundial got readjusted.
So any Cheryl, I see your hand, and then Jan.
I respect that the Southwest has some items that they would like to add, but I'm wondering if process-wise, it isn't more appropriate for us to do that on the next table. For instance, there were a couple of things that my group, the Northeast group, wanted to have considered and added. And so my understanding of our process is when we get to that blue page, that's the time for us to add. So I would like to suggest that we entertain a motion to pass policy 6 according to the staff recommendation.
Okay, I've got a motion on the floor to pass policy 6 according to staff recommendation. That would be to update the language to continue to protect.
Second.
Pat, thank you for the second. Is there discussion of that motion of just moving ahead with staff recommendation in this case? Any feedback on that?
This is Jan. I'm not sure if this is really part of that discussion or not, but I'm wondering, I hate to lose all of the long list, but I also know it's not practical for us to go through it. I'm wondering, Gail, if you have staff time to go through and eliminate those items that are clearly not sufficiently designated, and then ultimately, at some point in our future, get back to us with an amended list that might include more than just a narrower group.
Staff can certainly do that. One possible thought that you may want to consider is you do have several of the local planning area committees who have made very specific recommendations after reviewing the list about what they felt should be pursued for possible listing in the comprehensive plan as one of our very specific resources that we wanted to reach out. And that's where those sites that are specifically named here in policy 6 right now came from. They're actually called out in our comprehensive plan as resources that the county residents have determined are worthy of extra protection in our plan. I mean, we can certainly bring together a list for you. It won't be at your next meeting, but we can bring together a list that goes through that entire inventory, national, state, cemeteries, and archaeological sites, and pull the ones that we as staff believe would be difficult or don't have enough historic significance, and bring that back to you for further consideration.
Okay, thank you, Gail. Jim Allegria.
Jan, there is another point that's coming up later that could be used to do what you're suggesting in terms of not throwing out the entire list, but having a group specifically be, if the county can be certified as a local government, then under that umbrella, an advisory group could be formed to actually do a lot of that work, really dig into the details with the help of the planning staff, but actually do a lion's share of the work to address that in the long term.
Thanks, Jim.
Well taken. Yes.
Any further discussion on the motion at hand, which is to approve staff recommendation on policy 6?
I think our group would go along with what Jim just suggested, and Jan. So I would be able to support this as you suggest.
Thanks for that feedback, Todd. Okay, is there any objection to us going ahead with the motion to approve staff recommendation on policy 6 here, to amend the language to the county will continue to protect and retain the rest of policy 6? Okay, not hearing or seeing any objection. Gail, I think that gives you instruction for that one, that will approve staff recommendation. So policy 7, I'll just note that if you're reading along, it does cross over 2 pages, as Gail has helpfully shown us both here. Clatsop County will work with the Clatsop County Historical Society and the State Historic Preservation Office to evaluate the historical significance of sites and buildings identified by the Citizen Advisory Committee. The goal number 5 administrative rule evaluation process will also be applied at that time. The county will take appropriate action to protect any sites that are placed on the state of Oregon inventory of historic sites and buildings. This will be completed in the next 2 years. So the staff recommendation appears to me to mostly center around taking away the completed in 2 years language. Is that a correct estimate? Actually, I think the document that I had different language in the staff note than this one, Gail.
Yeah, so the staff note basically says, first of all, we don't know if this goal was ever completed, let alone completed within the 2-year period. One of the concerns that we have is that if we are to be working with the Historical Society and the State Historic Preservation Office, the sites that are identified in the state inventory, there's over 1,900 of them, but there are only probably about 60 in unincorporated county, and of them, some are very vague in their descriptions. Some of them have been altered to the point where they may not retain any historic significance any longer. We would definitely at a minimum recommend that you remove the 2-year time period. That would be our recommendation. And I think this could be a point where you could take Jim's recommendation about forming an ad hoc advisory committee to assist on working on that. I think that would be an appropriate recommendation.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying all of that, Gail. And it looks like we've got different points of feedback from some of the different groups. Clats of Plains suggests removing the 2-year time period language and replacing it with continuing to work with language. It looks like wholesale replaceal from Southwest, and also replacement for the Lewis and Clark area. Jim, I see that you have comment or a motion to make.
Andy first.
Andy, should I speak first or?
Yeah, go ahead. I might ask someone who just called in, can you mute yourself? We're getting a little bit of background noise on your phone.
Well, my suggestion is just hold off on this policy until we discuss whether the group would propose a certified local government. If we go that route, then this policy can really fold underneath that umbrella, plus actually some others that are coming up. And not that, I think that there are a lot of good suggestions from the district CACs, but it may help clarify things for our discussion if we first hit the certified local government or local certified government first.
So Jim is suggesting something there as far as our workflow for today that I think might be worthwhile. Is there objection from the group if we, so I think it's the second item on the this recommended policies worksheet is around certified local governments. Is there objection, because that's already come up now twice, to us talking about that particular item? Of course, Rachel also spoke to it in public comment about us taking on that item and then looping back to policy 6. Is there objection to us doing that within the group? Okay, I'm seeing a little bit of approval, and Pat, I'm taking that as no objection. So, okay. So let's talk about certified local government. That was one of the recommendations that maybe staff had brought forward for getting public input on that. Gail, could you walk us through what this means and what the ramifications would be? I know we've talked about some of them here, but I'd like to get your feedback on it.
Okay, so if a city or a county becomes a certified local government, from my perspective, one of the most important things it does is it helps us tap into additional funding sources to protect historic sites and buildings and structures. So that's one of the main reasons, but it also helps to structure a more formalized program of historic preservation within your community. So one of the things that would be required if we were to become a certified local government is that we have to set up a committee, a historic preservation committee or board or council to look at historic sites overall, or as we adopt regulations related to historic preservation, to review sites and context in relationship to those regulations. And I know that when a community discusses historic preservation, the first thing people think of are the paint police that are going to come out and paint swatches and look at your paint colors and tell you you can either be blue gray or gray blue, but you can't be the wrong color. And that's really a decision that a local community makes at a local level. So there's no mandate that you have to go into that level of detail. It can just be as simple an ordinance as saying, if you want to demolish a historic structure, maybe you have to come to this board, but maybe there's no design guidelines. But you would create your program that is tailored to your county's needs, or in this case, county's needs. And in terms of designating sites, as a certified local government with that board and that process, then designation would also go through that committee as well. One thing to keep in mind is that we cannot, under state law, designate a site without an owner's permission. So that you have to be very cognizant of it, even though we do want to promote and educate people about the importance of preserving historic structures and buildings and sites, that we can't mandate that somebody do something without their permission. So to go back to my main point though, it's all about the money. So.
Gail, you mentioned, so there are some positive sides as far as money and providing structure and perhaps creating a body that could do some of the inventory work that's been sort of a stumbling block for at least this group. Those all seem positives. What's the con case for why we would not want to become a certified local government?
Another layer of bureaucracy.
There is one additional limitation, and that is once certified, the owner sells the house, the next owner is obliged to maintain that certification.
Right, but we don't want to be talking necessarily about specific, well, yes, Mr. Lundy is correct, but what we're looking at right now is a little bit higher than that. Just looking at it from the county perspective of, do we place enough importance on our historic resources that we want to take this extra step to create a more localized, tailored program to really promote the preservation of historic structures? So for those of you, let me give you an analogy. For people who are familiar with flood insurance and FEMA, we as Clatsop County participate in the National Flood Insurance Program. And because of that, we are required to adopt regulations if you want to build in the floodplain, but in return, you get a break on your flood insurance. If the county chose, we could go a step above that and become part of the community rating system, where we go even above and beyond our minimum requirements and do more educational work, maybe have a little bit stricter regulations, and in turn that gives you an even bigger break on your flood insurance. So it's kind of that layering up, and it's really a question for the community to decide how much emphasis and effort and how much regulation are they willing to take on in order to protect the history of the county.
Okay, thank you, Gail. So is there discussion or motions from the group? Jim, I see your hand there.
Well, I'd just like to add and reinforce a couple of things that Gail has mentioned. What's attractive to me is that you actually have a structure and a process that's maintained over time. And it's not something that people do just on a comprehensive plan revision process. Even though you can do that throughout the life of the plan, realistically, changes really happen during the revision of the comprehensive plan. But having a certified local government, then you have something that can continue on in between and tackle some of these longer term endeavors, like reviewing not only what's currently listed, but also maybe adding things or deleting things, because some of those things I don't believe personally should really be on the list. So could help add and delete and be a conduit between the county and SHPO, but even the state listed sites. Because now since you're a certified local entity, you have better communications with SHPO. And in terms of transferring property for once it's sold, any owner can actually choose to take themselves off the list. So it's not like it's something once it's on, you can never remove it. So that there isn't, and I'm sure people are concerned about that, is about changing colors or changing windows or whatever. I mean, the designation doesn't have to be permanent if the owner chooses not to. But it's just like an added benefit. I think most people would consider that a feather in their cap to have their property listed. It means that there's something special about their property. And I think that that would work well from a historical perspective, where we're still at a point in this county that we're not too far away from the origins of the county. So we still have a lot of the initial structures intact, in sites intact or nearly intact. And so I think it's a good time for the county to formalize their position in terms of preservation. I'll get off my soapbox.
Thank you, Jim. I have Patrick and then Cheryl.
It sounds great. What it relies on is a functioning board or group that continues through time and keeps it valid. And I'm wondering what our capacity is. So we have Rachel here who might be able to, give us a sense of, are there a quorum of people in the county that would, have the capacity to do this kind of work like over time, enough that would be required? I guess that's number one, because it sounds, and the other question is, well, why haven't we done this before, and do other neighboring counties? Are they certified local governments? It seems like a good idea. Why haven't we had it? I'm wondering if it isn't the capacity to run the board, and do we have other counties that can serve as guidance? Thanks.
So I might ask, Rachel, can you maybe address the capacity issue, and then Gail, if you have insight on why we haven't done it, I'd appreciate that.
In terms of the capacity issue, I do believe that there are interested and qualified professionals in the local area who would like to do this work. And I think, there are certain standards for the people who are put on a preservation commission given to us by the state. And they try to have a really rounded out board. I think that Gail has the certified local government requirements up there, and they talk to, professional qualifications include history, architecture, architectural history, archaeology, other related fields. A lot of times you have maybe contractors or other people who have those kind of skills as well. But I definitely think that there is the capacity within our community to do this on a county-wide level.
That's really encouraging, because it is a pretty specific list of skilled, kind of or orientation. So that's good to know. Thank you.
Okay, and to address your question, Andy, I don't know the reason why this hasn't been done. I'm looking right now to see if I can even determine when the CLG program came into effect here in the state, and I'm not immediately seeing that. It could be that maybe that program didn't exist when this comp plan was adopted. It may have been that at the time that residents didn't see the need for it, or something like that. So just speculation.
Okay, thanks, Gail. Cheryl, you had your hand up.
I'd like to see us pass a motion to become a certified local government. And I'm just wondering if there are any other things that we should roll in at this time. Previously, Jim had mentioned that we should form a citizen advisory committee. And I'm looking to Gail, I think, is that something that should we add that wording now into the motion? And as we're looking at all of these other sheets that are going in little specific directions, I think I'm glad that we paused and we're doing this first, and then we'll come back and catch these other ones. Gail, is this a smart time to add anything else into this wording?
I would say it is. And I think what I would recommend is breaking it into two separate policy issues. One would be perhaps to form that initial advisory committee to just explore the possibility to see if there is support throughout the county to even support entering into a certified local government agreement. Because it may be that there is not public support for it. I mean, we might be a group of 12 people who support it, but the rest of the county may look at it and say, no, we don't want or need this. And then I would make your second policy recommendation then to be that if this initial committee moves forward and finds there is support, then we actually follow up on that and go through the process and follow it through to the end.
Is there feedback on those suggestions from the group?
I do. This is Todd, and I think that if we're going to have a reliance on a greater, wider community approval, we need to have a specific process by which we do it. Do we allow the Planning Commission to be our gauge, or do we have to have a vote of the public, or what? How do we go about deciding that the public supports it?
So if you've followed the resiliency project, that might not be the best example, but I think the way that you would handle it, and no offense to anybody who's participating on a committee, but I don't know that we need one more committee necessarily. I think it's a matter of educating, talking to people, holding public meetings around the county, making sure that they're well advertised, that they're held at appropriate times where you can get attendance, and obtaining feedback from the community. Also talking to the Planning Commission, talking to the Board of Commissioners, talking to various stakeholders, which would be above and beyond property owners, but I'm sure that there could be impacts for Chamber of Commerce, chambers of commerce, real estate people, and the real estate industry. I'm sure that there's plenty more out there. So I think it's more of having a conversation than necessarily having a formal committee to hold hearings and obtain, public testimony.
Jan?
I'll wade in since I started my career as working on citizen participation, and maybe I'm a little jaundiced, but I think in our current, there are problems in our current political climate, where a lot of people feel there's too much government taking over, and we're all being controlled and that kind of thing. So I would sort of maybe go the way of getting a few of us who care about this issue on the committee to have set up a couple of Zoom sessions with people from the Historical Society, from Lower Columbia, from the groups that are already in place that have a historical commitment, and just talking about the concept and talking about how we would handle it. My immediate thought doesn't go to this being a restrictive sort of thing that would determine the color of your house, but more an approach that says we've got some really significant history here. What can we do to preserve what's here, and to make sure that if something is threatened, we know about it. But I can hear Gail, with another committee, and I look at Astoria, that does have both a design review committee and a historic committee, and people do resent having to jump through those hoops, though they're important hoops. But maybe if we could talk informally with some of the players in the community, then start taking steps as to what we want to do and how we describe it and how we launch it, and leave the broad participatory meetings with real estate agents, etc., to some point 6 months from now or something.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we have a lot of good ideas and thoughts about process here, but we have sunk down too far into the weeds and we need to come back up and breathe some air for a moment. Because what we're looking at with this specific potential policy is not how the process will be run, who will be involved, when it's going to happen. All that we are doing is looking at whether or not at some point in the next 20 years, should the county consider exploring this opportunity of becoming a certified local government. And that's really, we need to come back up and look at that big concept. So we don't need to plan the entire process at this particular meeting. All we need is, do we even want to think about it in the next 20 years? Okay. So.
Cheryl, I see you're unmuted. Did you have a comment? And then Jim.
Thank you, Gail, for helping us come out of the weeds. Therefore, helping to move us forward, I move that the county shall obtain public input in order to determine whether there is public support for the county becoming a certified local government.
I second
I
it.
second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Do we have discussion on that motion? And the motion, as I understand it, mirrors the language and staff proposed language, correct, Cheryl? Okay, thank you. Is there a discussion on that motion? Jim?
Now, the only thing I would have is that it's still a little nebulous of what does that mean about soliciting public input. That's, other than that, I mean, I think it's fine, but it gives me pause when something is that broad. I was just thinking more about at this point in time that the committee would just propose being a certified local government. I don't know if we can do that in the comprehensive plan. Is that too large of a jump? But just looking at public comment in order to maybe be one in the future seems, on maybe it's the opposite side. It's a little bit too broad. Is there any way that we can maybe think of a way to bridge that gap between being so broad or maybe being too prescriptive? Like, we're not trying to subsume the county commission's prerogative. I don't know. So I'm not too sure what kind of language would be best served in here. Gail, do you have any? Do you see what I'm saying? Do you have any ideas on how to get around this?
I do understand what you're saying, Jim. I worded my proposal here actually very carefully from my perspective as a staff person. Again, coming back to the resiliency project, and if you followed the public meetings, the public comments about that, I wanted to make it very clear that if this policy were to go into the comprehensive plan, that this is not a foregone conclusion, that this is not something that we're trying to slip in past the public and public discussion and input. It's a policy that is very broad intentionally, to make sure that people understand that this is just the first baby step to even start thinking about it, and that there is going to be public input. If you were to change it, then I think that my recommendation would be that you, well, there's really not a good way to do it without taking out the public. And the public support is really what we need and want. So I can't recommend suggested wording right now.
But thank you, Gail.
How about just saying explore public support for the county becoming a certified public or certified local government instead of determine, just the word explore, to take out that whole section. County shall explore.
Yeah, It's still broad. I don't know if that addresses Jim's concern, but it works for me.
So I want to suggest that that's an amendment if we want to change that language, because we do have a existing motion. Sorry, Todd. I just want to be careful about that.
But from my perspective, I understand your concern, Gail, because we don't want this to blow up. We want this to move forward. And sometimes going slow means going fast in the long run.
But I think Mr. Farrar's suggestion of changing that, if somebody wanted to make that motion, I think that's still acceptable.
Does someone want to make an amending motion? Todd?
Yeah, let's see. The county shall explore public support for the county becoming a certified local government.
Okay, so is there a second for that amendment?
I'll second.
Thanks, Jim. Is there a discussion on that amendment? So changing the language from obtain public input in order to determine whether there is to explore. So the county shall explore public support for the county becoming a certified local government. Is there discussion on that amendment? Seeing no, move to discussion. Is there any objection to the language as amended? Okay, so we're back to the main motion. With that amendment approved, the county shall explore whether there is public support for the county becoming a certified local government. Is there any further discussion or amendment to that motion? Okay, this is possibly inappropriate of me as your chair, but I would move to amend to add within 2 years of passage of this plan to the end of that amended language, to just give us a time frame to figure this out. Is there a second for that?
I would second that.
To keep your nose clean, you could seek a motion rather than, as a chair, make a motion.
That's true, Robert. I'm hoping that none of you will vote me out as chair over this particular item, but it is your right to do so. I'm gonna say at the moment that we'll go. Jim, do you have discussion on that?
Yeah, no, it's just that I'm not sure. Do you mean 2 years from today or 2 years from the acceptance of the comprehensive plan?
My motion was to amend to include the language within 2 years of the passage of this plan, meaning the comp plan.
Okay, thank you.
When Gail was discussing, she mentioned that the process between comprehensive plans is a 20-year window, and I would prefer to not let it languish for that long. Any discussion on that amendment? Any objection? Or
would you read the proposal?
Sure. So the full language with that amendment would be: the county shall explore whether there is public support for the county becoming a certified local government within 2 years of the passage of this plan. Okay, adoption. Thank you. I think that's fine language. Any further discussion, or let me ask if there's objection to that amendment. Okay, hearing no objection. So we're back to the fuller main motion now. The county shall explore whether there is public support for the county becoming a certified local government within 2 years of the adoption of this plan, Any discussion on that motion? Okay, I'm seeing none. I might go for for hands this time because I think we've got everyone on video that's a voting member. All those in favor of the motion that we should recommend the county shall explore whether there is public support for the county becoming a certified local government within 2 years of adoption of this plan. Could you signify by raising your hand? All those in favor. Okay, I have Robert, Jan, Pat, Jim, Cheryl. I have hands. Thank you. All those opposed to this moved language? I don't see movement from Todd.
Andy, I think Andrea, who's the Lewis and Clark liaison, she's just on phone. She's not on video.
Thank you, Gail.
I voted in favor.
Okay, thank you, Todd. Your video was frozen for me, so I couldn't tell that, but thank you. Andrea, could I ask how you vote? And you are still muted if you're trying to vote. Gail, I think we have enough votes for passage, certainly. So Andrea, if you end up wanting to communicate your vote, feel free to, and we can record that for posterity. So we have some ideas about certified local government movement in the future, though that's not determining a course of action, of course. So if we move back to policy 7 on the worksheet, we're sort of still in a similar place to where we were before, though you know, we may hope that the county goes one way or another, but we may want to act independently of that. Is there discussion on policy 7? And I think we did talk a bit through the groups, though if either of the groups wanted to speak up, or any of the three, I guess, that had recommendations here. Any discussion on policy 7? Jim?
Yeah, I just have a question. The Clatsop Historical Society is named. Is that by the fact that they are a historical society and receives $5,000 from the county that makes them somehow a partner with the county, or are all county historical society have standings with SHPO by definition? Or I mean, or that it's just a question because that's just my question offhand.
Gail, do you have an answer for that?
Yeah, so the other historical societies are in incorporated areas. And Rachel, I know I should know the answer, but what year was Lower Columbia established?
1998.
Yeah, so they weren't even in existence at the time the plan was drafted.
So is that something that's limited to the County Historical Society? What I'm getting at is we could go one or two ways. Either we could add LCPS, for instance, or we could just make it more generic and not necessarily name the Clatsop County Historical Society. I don't really know which way would be best. It's just that it strikes me as odd that there's one, just the county listed, and that's it.
Yeah, so there's not a requirement. Obviously, you want to work with SHPO because they are really the overarching umbrella for historic preservation in the state. But you also want to work with your local organizations as well. So you could certainly change it to State Historic Preservation Office and local preservation organizations, or some other similar wording, and just delete specific references to local agencies. But the Historical Society is not part of the county, and if they were getting any funding at all from the county in 1980, it was nowhere near $5,000. So.
Right. Well, then in that regard, I would like to make it more generic along the lines that you suggested, Gail.
Okay, so
Can you suggest language? Or
yeah,
thank you,
so
Gail.
we'd want to retain the SHPO reference and change. Yeah, so if we keep the SHPO reference and then change it to local historic preservation organizations. Does that address your concern, Jim?
Yes, yes, thank you very much. That would be my suggestion.
Okay.
Or my proposal.
So is there, I would want to sort of treat this as a motion just to make sure that the group is signing off on this. Is there a second for that change?
I'll second that
I'd like
change.
to see. May I
Okay.
suggest that we spell out SHPO what it is?
I think that's valid, Todd. I think it is spelled out in the original, so if we're retaining the language, it should be okay, but thanks, Gail. So I've got a second from Patrick. Is there a discussion on this particular point? Jan?
I'm not sure why that's making me uncomfortable exactly, but we have a countywide historical society granted since Astoria was so early into the Euro-American world. A lot of emphasis is here, but they are countywide. They're well recognized at the state level. I might, there is a Cannon Beach Historical Society. There is a, there is a group in Warrenton. There's Lower Columbia. I'm not sure why we should take off that name, because I think sometimes when you're a staff member 7 years from now and you're figuring out what you're supposed to do, specificity helps. I'm quite willing to hear arguments against that, but I don't understand when we've got a pretty well funded group with an archive that is available to the county, that is well known at the state level, why we would kind of fuzz that up.
Jim?
Actually, Jan, I thought you were supporting me in the beginning, because making it more general will be inclusive of Cannon Beach Historical Society, the Warrenton, the informal group that they currently have, or any other group that could begin into the future. I didn't mean to degrade the Clatsop County, but I also know that there are other organizations that could help contribute to this effort.
Pat?
We could also say SHPO, Clatsop County Historical, and all others. I mean, if that would be to note it and also be inclusive.
Yeah, I'm not going to fall on my sword over it. It's just it's an organization that's been around a long time and has deep recognition at the state level.
Gail, did you have a comment too?
Yeah, again, maybe just to raise us a little bit up above the weed bed here. Remember that we are looking at a policy that will cover a 20-year period. And so, maybe the Historical Society will be there, maybe it won't. We certainly hope it will. There may be other groups that come into existence. As a staff person looking at it, you hopefully when 7 years from now, when new staff comes in, they will have enough professional knowledge to say, I wonder if there is a local historical society, if they look at this policy and be able to figure that out for themselves. The concern I have is that if we're going to try to specify every organization that we should be working with, is that if a new organization comes along or one organization changes its name and is no longer the Clatsop County Historical Society, but the Historical Society of Clatsop County, does that free me of my obligation to have to work with them if we're going to get that specific? So I would prefer, again, looking at it, broad picture, 20-year period, you know, and I think in this case, a little bit more general is acceptable.
I move we accept the language as written.
Okay, so Todd, I don't think we actually have to take that as a motion. Or did you mean that we accept the language as written in policy 7? Just for clarity here.
Yeah, that's what I meant. The
Okay.
language which Gail just put in purple there.
So I don't think we need an additional motion to keep going with that language, since I took that as Jim's motion earlier, which already had a second. So we can go ahead with that language if it's the desire of the group. Certainly, Robert, I saw you just came unmuted.
Well, it's just that we are talking about being supportive of purple prose, correct?
Don't be picking on the purple prose.
So I'll just share a concern, and then we can certainly go to a vote. My only hesitation with this is who chooses what constitutes local historic preservation organizations. And my preference would be, and I won't do it this time, but my preference would be if somebody amended language to specify what group would be saying who are the local historic preservation organizations for the sake of this language here. So is that the county commission's choice, the planning commission? Is it Bob on the corner? Who chooses what constitutes a local historic preservation organization? Or maybe I'm ignorant here, and that's a term of art that SHPO is maintaining a list of local historic preservation organizations, but I would just like clarity on how that comes to be.
Speaking from a staff viewpoint, if I were to read this policy 10 years from now, my first thought would be, obviously I need to contact SHPO, and then I would probably look to SHPO if I was not familiar with organizations in the county, because I'm a new planner to Clatsop, I would be relying on SHPO to direct me in the direction of local agencies that I should be contacting. I think that as we look at the policy, so if we go back to policy 7, the intent of this policy is that as the county, and I take that to mean county staff, because I'm pretty sure it's not going to be the Board of Commissioners or the county manager out there doing this work. So it's going to be county planning staff. We are supposed to be working with the people who have the knowledge of how to identify what makes a building historically significant or a site historically significant, that we are going to be taking that information, first of all, to determine whether or not the site moves on for further designation. If it does move on for further designation, then we have a process that we go through according to Goal 5. And then once that process is completed, then we put in place the appropriate protections to protect that particular site. So really all this policy is saying is that we need to seek assistance to help us identify what is historically significant and what the value of that significance is. So does it, I mean, obviously Bob on the corner may have some information that may be relevant that shouldn't be excluded from the process. But this is my concern. It should be anybody or any entity that has fact-based information that's relevant to the property that's being inventoried. Does that make sense?
Dustin.
And independent of whether one group is in the outs or not politically, locally at that time. I say there wouldn't need to be any official blessing. It would be with staff's aggressive pursuit of expertise in that area.
Okay, thank you both for clarifying on that. So I will move to the group on this. Can I get group hands for approval on the purple prose as written? And Todd, can I ask you to voice off? I see everyone else's hand there.
Yes, my hand's up.
Okay, and then Andrea, do you approve of the language as written?
I do. I just can't figure out how to put my hand up on my video.
No problem. I'm glad you could speak up this time. Thank you. Okay, so that language is approved. Is there further action? That was a specific part of policy 7, obviously. Is there any other language that the group wants to modify or address in this meeting? Okay, not hearing or seeing movement from the group. Sounds like we can move on to the next policy, Gail. So we're into a new section on cultural resource policies. Policy 1 here is the county will review land use activities that may affect known archaeological sites. If it is determined that a land use activity, Donna, I might ask you to mute. Sorry, we're getting some background noise. Thank you. If it is determined that a land use activity may affect the integrity of an archaeological site, the county shall consult with the State Historic Preservation Office on appropriate measures to preserve or protect the site and its contents. Staff note. Gail, do you just want to explain the staff note quickly?
Yeah, so the intent of this policy is that we're supposed to be taking action to protect known historic sites, and the staff note simply confirms that we do have standards in place in section 3.194 of our standards document that deals with protection of the archaeological sites. So we would recommend retention of this policy, but there are, as you'll see, specific amendments that you will want to consider and that staff would support.
Okay, thank you. So in blue language, that's the Clatsop Plains group. Robert, do you care to speak to the feedback from Clatsop Plains? Oh, you're muted, sir. Sorry. I still can't hear you.
Okay, so the intent of the changes recommended by Clatsop Plains had to was first of all that before contacting the State Historic Preservation Office, that at the time we talked about it, it was the Chinook Indian Nation, now Clatsop Chinook, and then you'll see discussion about who should be included in that list of tribal entities, that the tribal entities should be notified first, and then the State Historic Preservation Office.
Okay, Robert, does that capture the sentiment of the group? I still can't hear you, sir. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Without expanding greatly, there is some bad blood. So as far as I'm just being, yes, I like the language as it is. Yes, I think it is accurate. From my knowledge, it is fair, but also it is known that there is future contention over denominating groups of indigenous peoples. But I support as the Clatsop Plains expressed it.
Okay, thank you, Robert. We also have language building off of that, it seems, from both the Northeast and the Lewis and Clark group. And I guess that's also the Southwest group, all seem to have, I don't want to present this wrongly, but seem to have suggested that they generally like the Clatsop Plains language, but might prefer some more inclusive or broader language about to include more any applicable tribes that might have been in the region. Is that an accurate summation of those three comments? Cheryl, Todd, or Andrea, do you have feedback on that?
It is from our point of view.
Okay, and Cheryl?
It is from our point of view, and I would look to Jan to possibly suggest wording for us. So what the Clatsop Plains has suggested is a perfect starting place, and then hopefully Jan will just move us on to do that additional language.
Okay, and then Andrea, can I ask feedback from your group as well?
Yes, that was a similar, I think it was a question that I might have brought up, just wanting clarity on the different, because I'm not, super educated on what different tribes there may be that would be invested in the land in the area. And I actually, now of course I can't find it and it's going to drive me insane, but I was sent an email because someone that was on our meeting that was just listening in that works at Fort Clatsop forwarded me a document that gave some really good information about all of that stuff, and I wanted to forward it to our group, and I just haven't gotten around to it yet. Now I can't find it in my inbox, but yes, basically just doing a little more research, I think, to make sure that we are inclusive. It was the goal.
Andy?
Thank you. Yeah, Don, Jan had her hand up, and then let me come to your comment after that. Is that okay?
Yeah, it better be.
Jan?
Well, Andrea, I believe the document you were talking about is that one put out by the National Park Service. It's fairly extensive in terms of both history and cultural analysis and background stuff. And Chris sent it out to everybody, I think. So I happened to look at it again. I hadn't seen it for a while. But so that is accessible, and I would encourage you to take a look at that. I would just, I don't, this is an issue that's important to me, and I know I'm speaking as somebody who's both has some history in this, but really is not, it's not my battle. But I think we have to be, the only way to not choose sides in this argument, and there is a deeply held argument, is that we have to be inclusive. And I worked with both Pacific County and Clatsop County on the bicentennial, the Lewis and Clark bicentennial, for 10 years, and still bear the scars, and still, I'm sure, have people angry with me. But I was directed by a large group called the Circle of Tribal Advisors that was a national group that included tribes all along the trail. And they said, you must be inclusive. So I think we need to have both the Chinook Nation and the Clatsop Nehalem Confederated Tribes, and that represents the people who are with it, have some history within this county, who are still in existence as an organized group.
My turn?
Yeah, I went out to the warehouse.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
All right. Being inclusive is a contentious situation with us. I'm familiar with Ms. Mitchell and her work regarding the Lewis and Clark bicentennial. It is a very contentious situation that a group that was organized from 2003, 2004, and then came forward and gave birth to their culture in 2005 at the bicentennial, that being the blank Nehalems. We, the Chinook Indian Nation, are the true inheritors and sovereign stewards of this land that is now occupied by Euro-American descendants. We have historical proof of that. Our council and our Chinook Council and our Chinook Culture Committee is made up of descendants from the 5 tribes that make up the Chinook Indian Nation. And for your education, they are the Willapa to the north, Cathlamet to the east, Wakayakum in the central, Lower Chinook in the Owako Chinook region on the Washington shore, and the Clatsop people. We are the Chinook Indian Nation, the true inheritors of this land. Anything that comes in, we've had, unfortunately, because of our continued attack from the federal government to dismiss our existence and not recognize a treaty that was signed in good faith in 1851, 1852, 5 days on the plains of Tansy. I'm sorry, I'm catching myself. I'm a little bit emotional. This is very distressing. We have been attacked by other recognized tribes, that being the Siletz and the Quinault. Siletz is done a lot of damage by saying that our area is inclusive in their culture, which is historically wrong. I want to point out 2 historical truths, and they are in book form, and they have been read by scholars all around the nation and world, and are accepted as the given truth of the history of this land, this area of the Lower Columbia. If you wish to be educated in the truth, the books are Chinook Resilience, Heritage and Cultural Revitalization on the Lower Columbia River, by John Danke, and then that's the latest information. He is a heralded historic archaeologist writer, John Jon Danke, Daehnke. And the other book is Chinookan Peoples of the Lower Columbia by Boyd, Ames, and Johnson. And the last name Johnson is our current chairman, Tony Johnson. These two scholarly works are available at the Columbia River Maritime Museum store and also available through the Chinook Indian Nation office, which is not located in Chinook, Washington. It is located in Bay Center on the Willapa tribe land, Willapa Chinook tribe land. This publication that people are talking about and not exactly naming, that I received this morning from our friend Gail, Columbia Pacific Native American Guide. That information is fictitious, derogatory, inflammatory, absolutely historically wrong. It includes tribes that are not in the lower Columbia Pacific region. No one who put this information, this guide together, consulted with the Chinook Indian Nation Council, a member of our 9-member council. No one that put this guide together came and spoke to our Chinook Cultural Committee members. We have not given any authorization, clearance, or any of that information or any of that blessing to this guide or manufacturing of this guide. There are no credits in this guide to the Chinook Indian Nation. And I'm still trying to figure out who in the hell put it together. It is so erroneous. It has, in fact, the one that is really hurtful is the identification, or the not the identification, but the hodgepodge collection of who speaks what language. And that clarification of the languages of the Chinook versus other Salish tribes is clearly written and clearly explained in both of those books that I have given to you, the information. It behooves everyone who is on our Clatsop lands, occupying them now, need to historically correct their thoughts and thinkings that may have been influenced by these blank Nehalims and Siletz, or even the Quinault. And not knowing that the Quinault are historically not a friendly peoples to the Chinook, is not right. But we, when the now named Quinault Indian Reservation was put together with help from Governor Stevens, or whatever he is, Stevens, before he was killed in the Civil War, combined all fish-eating peoples into that land. The Chinook, Quileute, the Chehalis, all these Cowlites were all in this conglomeration in the Quinault Indian Reservation. But it turns out that the Chinook still are 52% landholders in that conglomeration of tribes. But we have never, ever, and it is written in the treaties, divorced ourselves from the lands that our ancestors are buried on. We have defied Stevens and the federal government, saying that we do not move from the lands where our ancestors were buried, and we wish to be with them from here to eternity. If I have upset people in there, that's the truth. I'm not going to back or apologize, but you need to know that the Chinook Indian Nation is a very vested, interested holder in the current and future process of this planning, and we are going to be aggressive in addressing the historical sites, preservation of them that are related to our culture. We will defend our culture. I'm sorry, but I speak the truth from the Chinook Culture Committee, and I have marching orders from the Chinook Council to address any derogatory actions towards the truth, that being the Chinook Indian Nation was, is, and always will be the stewards of the land that you now occupy.
Don, thank you for your input and time. I'm pretty confident that no one is meaning to pick a fight here or to offend. But I appreciate the information you're giving us. Gail, did you have feedback as well?
Only that I would like to apologize for Mr. Bing. It was not my intent to offend him at all. I was forwarded some information and asked to share it, and it was my mistake for not vetting it before I sent it out to the group. So my apologies to you. And I did get your phone message about 5 minutes before this meeting, and so I was not able to phone you back at that time.
I still love you, Gail.
Oh.
I still love you, Gail.
I love you too.
Thanks, Gail. Andrea?
Hi, I also wanted to thank Dawn for sharing so much just now, and I'm embarrassed of my own ignorance about this issue. I grew up here and learned literally nothing about what we're talking about as far as the true history of the Chinook Nation, and other than just knowing that name and knowing that that's the land that we were on. But I still don't have a good understanding, and I just actually purchased both of the books that you recommended, so thank you. And I feel like I have a lot of education to do on my own time and would love to understand better. And I could probably ask you about 100 questions, and maybe we can connect via email and I can just send you a few questions if you have the energy and desire to want to have a conversation to help me get a better understanding of the situation, because I feel like I don't really know much of it. If that's something you want to do, we can talk outside of this group.
Andrea,
Yes.
I heard this, and my heart and hands are open. I will share and answer all of your questions regarding Chinook Nation, and the tribes, the 5 tribes that make up the nation, and whatever you have need of. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn.
Okay, so is there, just as far as process for us to go forward here, is there a notion from the group about what recommendation we would like to advance? We've got some different language suggested. We've just learned some important things. How would the group like to advance at this time?
I mean, is it possible to hold off on creating like a rigid revision of the version of this policy until I mean, for me, making recommendations, I feel like I could even vote on what it should say until I have a better understanding of the situation. But if we need to move forward, I get that too.
So procedurally, there's nothing limiting us to coming back and changing language or amending language in the future. If this is something, indeed, like you said, you just purchased a couple of books. If that's something that you want to read and research and come back with a broader idea about, that's totally permissible. It's also fine for us to put down language now and come back to that language if we feel like we were remiss in a previous action we took. Cheryl, I see you're unmuted.
Yeah, I would just remind us all again of what our purpose is and what our role is. And it is certainly not our role to determine or to settle any historical conflicts. It is not our role to determine or to settle any cultural conflicts. It is our role to protect the land and to make that the wording and the process broad and comprehensive so that the land is protected. And what we're looking at is, I would remind us that it is our role that the land use activity may affect the integrity of the archaeological site. So what we are trying to do is to put in place wording and process to protect the archaeological sites. So we are focusing on land use decisions. We are not making a decision about the validity or invalidity of any history or culture or tribal history. I would encourage us to come back to policy 1 and see if we can make a decision today.
Thanks, Cheryl. Andrea, again, I have one more quick question then, I guess, which would be if under the focus that you just gave us, if we're trying to figure out basically which groups, if we want to be as inclusive as possible, or which groups we are including in basically getting feedback from when making a decision about land use regarding archaeological sites. Like I don't know the legalities of what the state has more control over versus like what the county has more control over, versus if we're say there's an instance where this policy is being used and the county is going to be county staff is going to be the one making the determination after having conversations with, say, the Chinook Nation and the state Historic Preservation Office and perhaps the Clatsop or whomever. Are we just trying to do a broad determination of what the process is?
If we're just looking for a term, let's use a term something to the effect of Native American tribes indigenous to this county, and not name any specific tribes or nations.
Chinook object.
On what grounds?
There is only historically 5 tribes that belong to one nation called the Chinook. I explained that. It is
Yes, I heard that.
Historically recorded, and yes, we are indigenous, but there is a proper name, and that is the Chinook Indian Nation.
But we're talking about land in Clatsop County, and the Chinook Indian Nation is a much broader entity. And so those tribes which were indigenous to this county area is what we're concerned about. And I think that we don't want to get into an argument about tribal names or designations. That's
Well, we'll
political
put a
question.
designation. We'll put a designation on it. It is Clatsop Chinook.
I don't see the problem with having indigenous native tribes.
That's
indigenous
true.
to this county.
That's the Euro-American explanation for what is everything on Turtle Island. But that's not the correct definition, according to the true people that lived here before Euro-American occupation.
I can appreciate that there's a lot of animosity in that. But we want to plan land. We're not trying to dispute Clatsop claims. I think that they're very valid.
Go ahead and plan land. You have that. We are going to protect what is still historically and archaeologically important to our people.
Yes, and we want that input.
Hold on, guys. Let's back up just a second here. Todd, I want to I want to actually seek clarity from Don here on this point. What I'm hearing from you, Don, is that the Chinook Indian Nation historically is the sole what we would call indigenous tribal resident of this county. Is that the contention you're making?
That is absolutely correct. You got to realize Collier, Bash, and all these people from the Black Nahims have, blood lineages to the treaty signers that were at Tansy in 1851-52. Collier was a blood descendant of Cobbaway. But you got to, their intention to break away from Chinook and establish their own identity is because they wanted to get, well, it's greed. They wanted that money and recognition that the Chinook have been fighting for legally through representatives that have petitioned us in Congress, and through the BIA. We have historical battles from the early 1920s all the way straight through. So there is only one. There has always only been one. The Clatsop Chinook.
So
the reason for the tribes being, these 5 tribes being together, has been a story of pestilence that came through our territory many, many times, and the need to make sure that the blood was not stagnant in one area, and to make sure that there was a harmonious contribution for survival. So marriages between tribal leaders and other members of these 5 tribes made it a cohesive governance. And this cohesive governance allowed for a peaceful environment in trade and in defense. And all this obviously came crashing down when Gray put his ship into our waters. And then from then on, it was downhill.
Thanks, Don. So I respectfully to everyone here, and you know, being conscious of the fact that we I think sort of obviously need to do some work on what language we're going to use here still. Some of us have suggested we're going away to do some education. I think there's room for further dialogue. I would definitely entertain that we should come back to this one after we've thought about it some. I think, Don, I hope that I have internalized and captured the message you're getting across to us. And I think we need to take some time with this. But we also have a series of other policies to try and cover today. So I don't think we're going to settle this as a group, is my sense right now.
Andy?
Yes, sir.
I don't have your spelling of your last name, and I would prefer to be formal with you since we haven't met personally. Can I have that, please?
Sure. My name is Andy Davis.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Davis. I appreciate your ears and heart listening to the situation at hand.
We appreciate your input, Mr.
I want to thank you, Don. Your explanation was extraordinary and moving, and I want to thank you for joining us and sharing all this wisdom with us.
And Andy, might we ask Don to chime in on the policy too, about the next policy here that I think might be relevant, so we can have that framed as we go forward as well?
Sure. I think that's a good suggestion. If the group is okay with us moving to policy 2 discussion, and then we can come back to policy 1. Jan?
I'd just like to say there's so much pain in this discussion on both sides. And I open my mouth and I fear I create more. But I think if we indeed, there is so much to learn about what has gone on from the minute that the Europeans, Americans stepped foot on the shore. If people want to research, let's be sure we look at not just one position, because there is counter, and I would wish that we could not get into supporting one group or the other, and I hope that we are able to come to language that allows, in the future, allows local government to speak to the appropriate people who are here, who know the history, and that in doing so, we protect the land.
Okay, any other discussion before we move to policy 2? So for policy 2, it reads, Indian cairns, graves, and other significant archaeological resources uncovered during construction or excavation shall be preserved intact until a plan for their excavation or reinterment has been developed by the State Historic Preservation Office. Gail, you have a staff note here. Apparently this is internalized to local policy already. Is that correct?
Correct. It's the same note as policy 1. And we,
okay, thank you. Yeah. And do you suggest retention on that basis?
The basic premise of the policy, absolutely, because there does need to be protection. Will be at the discretion of the committees to determine the specific wording, similar to your discussion with policy 1.
Okay. Are there any wrinkles specific to this one that would be different? So I think what we're wrestling with as an overall issue here is language around how to treat original inhabitants of this county, and what language to designate the group that would speak for original inhabitants of this county. You know, when we're trying to figure out what to do with an archaeological or cultural resource, who do we talk to? Who speaks for those items or sites, right? So is there anything unique to policy 2 as opposed to policy 1 that would make it different in any way than where we would land, whether it's some inclusive language or Chinook Indian Nation? Is this different on policy 2?
No, it's the same item or content discussion as policy 1. Again, keeping in mind that the recommendation from the Clatsop Plains Committee was to put whatever term we end up using before, in the list of notifications, before the State Historic Preservation Office. So there are those two things that you're looking at here.
Okay. Is there feedback from the group on policy 2, or on the recommendations from Clatsop Plains and other groups?
Mr. Davis?
Yes, sir.
I can add a little bit of history as to the notification situation. I don't know if you recall when across the river in at the now Fort Columbia area, there was that excavation going on to realign the road there, so it would make some kind of park area. And in that excavation, excuse me. Oh, Some of our relations were dug up and exposed to the violence around them. The state of Washington made the correct decision to notify us first, the Chinook Tribal Council and Chinook Culture Committee, so that we can have them stop desecrating the graves of our ancestors. Anyway, I just a point that they did the correct thing, and that language we have now for Clatsop Plains is kind of like the offshoot of what happened across the river.
Mhm. Thank you. Is there discussion or motion from the group about policy 2, or do we want to come back to that in the same future discussion?
I'd like to come back to it since it seems like same issue as policy 1 pertains to this one. And
Okay. Is that amenable to the rest of the group?
I'm supportive of the gists of both policies. I'm just interested in getting the terminology correct.
Okay. Gail, I have a feeling that's the sense of the group here, that the policy in general is supported, that we just want to make sure that we get the language right. That seems to be what's coming out of all of the subgroups, with the exception of whatever is in red. I forget what's in red.
No recommendation made. That's Elsie Jewell.
Elsie Jewell, thank you. But I think we're safe to say that we just need to come back with the preferred language for the group here.
Okay.
I might ask, would it be appropriate to the group if we set a time to come back to that, to say December, just so that we don't let it slip off our radar, and that gives us a couple of months for dialogue or self-education as needed?
good for me.
Okay.
Yeah, this Todd, I agree.
Thank you all for the discussion around that, and Mr. Abing, thank you for joining in and offering your expertise, and I appreciate that. There are several not easy emotional subjects to talk about here, and so your input and effort to get through that input is appreciated as well.
Thank you.
So the next items for us are to move to the recommendations sheets. Thank you, Gail, for taking that down. So the first item is the Bradwood Landing and Clifton are not considered as historic sites. So do we want to include them? And actually, there's several of these sort of things, correct? Or there might be other ones that are listings of things.
Right. So
Yeah.
each of the individual planning area committees went through the list and pulled specific sites that they felt had significance for their particular planning area. I don't think Clatsop Plains recommended anything specific, but Northeast talked about Clifton and Bradwood, particularly the net shed that's out at Clifton, and then also the Swenson Cemetery. Southwest, as we talked about, had the Arch Cape Tunnel and Hug Point and the sites around there and the wagon trail. Elsie Jewell was looking at the Hamlet School and the cemetery. There were no particular resources identified out of Lewis and Clark area. So these would be ones that, unless for some reason the countywide wanted to overrule those recommendations, we would, as staff, go back and do some more research on them, bring them back to the committees, and then look at possible inclusion as a specified Goal 5 resource. This would be an opportunity if there were any specific, if you wanted to weigh in on the Bradwood Landing, Clifton recommendation.
So Gail, am I hearing accurately that you're looking for negative weigh-in here if for some reason the central doesn't want these, or more specificity?
Yeah, so I mean, you can weigh in one way or the other if you want to lend some extra support to the Northeast recommendation, and they supported it. The other groups felt that because it wasn't in their planning area, they really didn't want to weigh in on it in particularly. So.
Okay. So group for this recommendation from the Northeast, the Bradwood Landing and Clifton, is there further feedback from the central group about these recommendations? And Cheryl, if you want to speak to them, go ahead.
And I don't think that we need to pull out these two or to give any special time or consideration to, and perhaps if Gail or Andy want a motion, we can work on the wording, but all of these, so the Southwest has a nice list, Arch Cape Tunnel, Wagon Trail. We are supportive of those being investigated. The Hamlet Cemetery and the Hamlet School, we are supportive of those being investigated. So I think all of these just go into the same bucket. And Gail understands that it is the local group's intention that we would like for them to be researched to see if it's worth moving forward. So yeah, we don't need to consider Bradwood or Clifton separately. Gail or Andy, do you need a motion from us to have county staff look at all of these that were listed by the individual groups?
My belief would be that if those have come out of the individual groups with the recommendation that that staff can take that to take action on, and we don't necessarily have the same expertise as a group as the local groups do. That's why the local groups exist, you know. So I'm very happy to let those recommendations stand without motion, unless this group wants to act on them in some different way.
Mr. Davis?
Yes, sir.
Can I put some history on Bradwood? And I did mention it at Clatsop Plains that when that topic came up, that it is a usual and a custom place for the Chinook to go fishing. There was a village site there that was tied with the village site at Wana, and a village site that's upriver that's near Westport. The site is so indicated in, believe the Chinookan peoples of the Lower Columbia. The map will have like a dot of certain places. Mm-hmm. The town Clifton was actually a cliff town. It was raised, and all of the planks from the plank houses were used to make boat houses for the Euro-American fishermen, and fencing for cattle in the area there by Aldridge Point and all those other places, and barns. I think you can still see some of them in the old facilities that are standing, that plank houses that were planks that were taken. They were of good dimensions and diameters, but nonetheless, I just wanted to know that I just didn't want the idea that Bradwood would be just dismissed as a pile of sand. It has historical significance to Chinook as a fishing ground. In that area between Wana and Clifftown, was the area our people used to actually look into the Columbia River, because it's a narrowing area of the river where lots of different runs of Chinook, or excuse me, of salmonids had come up, and they could identify the runs visually and then be prepared to send a message down to the fishing canoes to lay out the nets and harvest for the surrounding communities and trade with other communities in our region. Anyway, I wanted to point that out.
Thank you, Mr. Aby. Any other? I might take this and the third one down, which is the one after the certified local government, as one unit. I might even suggest that just for the sake of clarity, that maybe the items listed in the first line be added to the third one. Is that acceptable to the group? I'm getting acceptance from Cheryl. Yeah, okay.
Yes.
And is if we're combining those, is there further comment on any of these other items beyond just accepting that staff will look into them and gather more information on them? Okay, not hearing further feedback. Gail, I think we're all okay with those. Anyway. So the Northeast group, the next, so that we've already covered certified local government. The Northeast group has the next recommendation, which is create an overarching goal for historic and cultural resources. Is that appropriate for the next one for us to talk about, Gail? Okay. Cheryl, do you want to tee this one up for discussion?
Our group likes to do overarching goals, and then they have specific goals under them. So in that theme, we've talked a lot about, why are we preserving historic sites, and we wanted to just say that sort of out loud. So the wording was that cultural resources are to recognize all contributions to local history. The history of Clatsop County is multifaceted and should be recorded and preserved whenever possible for future generations. So it's just one of those big picture goals within policies under it.
So Cheryl, for clarity's sake, so the suggested language is everything after the colon in what Gail has on the screen for us in the worksheet. Is that correct?
Yes. Well, yeah, and whatever wording makes it less awkward, but yes, that is the intent.
Okay, and this would be added policy language under historical policies or cultural policies, cultural resource policies, or both.
Both.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for clarification there. Is there discussion from the group on this suggestion of an overarching goal for both historic and cultural resources, or about the language suggested? Either one. Todd?
Yeah, I was going to say that I support this, and I was going to suggest, Gail, that we might bring Linda's list in at this point, or if you wish to do it in the way you've done this, which is, yeah, these are overarching goals as well for cultural issues. So I don't want to usurp Cheryl's position, though. We want to act on that, but these are similar, and we probably want to talk about all of them.
So I do feel like there's definitely some overlap here. I also feel like there's some unique ideas presented from the Northeast group as far as this idea about contributors and history being multifaceted, and that it should be recorded and preserved. I think there's a bunch of other facets that are suggested in the language from your group, Todd, but I might be inclined to approach those things separately, if that's okay for the group. We can go either way, but in my
That's
head,
fine with me. Andy, that's fine with me.
Okay, thank you, Todd. Actually, I'm getting the sense, so I'm seeing some wandering eyes, a bit more yawns and things than normal. I know we've gone a little over 2 hours now. Thank you, Robert. We've gone a little over 2 hours now. Does anyone oppose us taking like a 5-minute break for everybody to just get up, use the bathroom, get some blood flowing, have a little snack or drink, as it were, so that we can come back and do the rest of these with sort of clear heads? Is that okay for the group? Okay, let's take a 5-minute break. I've got 3:12. I'll try to start us back up at 3:17. Thanks, folks.
Andy, how long are we planning on going?
I don't necessarily have a plan. I certainly want us to get through this as efficiently as possible. And part of the reason why we were scheduled up to starting at 1 today was so that we could get staff out for later meetings. Let's see, we've got.
Yeah, so we're scheduled to basically be out around 3:45 or no later than 4 if possible.
Okay, thanks, Gail.
Yeah.
Thanks, Gail.
You're welcome.
That's it.
It is my fervent hope that we can finish today.
Okay, for those of you who have your speakers on, I think we're about ready to get back to it. And just as first item of business, Gail has, in case you stepped away before she said it, we've scheduled for until 3:45 for the meeting. We have the room until 4. So let's try to wrap up. I think that's a possible thing for us to do, but let's try to wrap up our items by 3:45, and maybe we can take public input if we have any at that point. Okay, so going back to the creating an overarching goal for historic and cultural resources, that was out of the Northeast group. They have suggested language there. Is there motion or discussion from this group about whether we should move forward with adding that language as ostensibly goal language for historical and cultural resources? Todd?
Yeah, I suggest that we look at this language and at the language in Linda's and any other groups' suggestions, that the staff go through them and put them together into a coherent package of proposals.
Let me check. Cheryl, do you think your group would be amenable to some combined goal language coming out of what you had presented and some of this list?
Yes, for sure. We did not think that our wording was the beginning and the end or the only option. And unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to look at the specific recommendations from Todd's. So, but to merge them, yes, we would absolutely be open to that.
Okay, and I don't know that I've had a chance to look at this worksheet from Southwest either. Skimming it in this meeting, it seems like a good list. Is there other feedback from the rest of the group about, so Todd, can I restate that as a motion from you?
For some reason, I'm not getting the sound now. People are talking and I'm not hearing them.
And she won't also hear us to suggest muting herself.
Yes,
Todd,
you may. Yes,
so
affirmative.
I'm going to take that as a motion to combine the language from Linda Ironman's proposed policies for discussion and the Northeast proposed goal.
So in this case, in that situation that you're
Second from Cheryl.
As combined.
the doctor,
Thank you, Cheryl.
you could be saving money. You could be having a
So we're getting some
right, but then also
additional noise right now. I think that's from Jan.
If you did, let's say next year you had Plan G with a high deductible, and all of a sudden you've got a major illness or cancer or something where you needed a lot of doctor appointments and treatments and that kind of thing.
Just Andy,
you would easily reach that $2,400.
Apologies, folks. Welcome back, Pat. Jan, can you hear us now? Okay, so for those of us who have just joined or just got their audio back, there's a motion on the floor from Todd, seconded by Cheryl, to combine, to ask staff to combine the proposed policies from the Southwest Coastal Citizens Advisory Committee and the Northeast Advisory Committee, Citizens Advisory Committee, and create summarized goals using language that staff is happy with to capture these sentiments. So that's the motion on the table right now. Is there discussion of that motion of letting staff work with the Northeast and Southwest proposed goals? Jim, and then Robert, it looks like you came off mute too.
I just really have a comment. I think these proposed policies are fine. Just for everyone's information, is that SHPO actually has rather well delineated framework for a local, a certified local government, and that they may want to look at those guidelines, because I can see this as being laying the groundwork for that if the certified local government does pass, is approved, then it would be less work to transition this into the state's framework for the certified local government.
All right, so I think that's a good suggestion, Jim. Let's sidebar that for Gail when she is back, so that they can use that as information as staff goes forward with it. Robert?
I was simply unable to grasp the verbiage of the motion.
Okay. So restating the motion. So we had, and it's too bad that Gail isn't here to bring it up. We had a recommendation from the Northeast CAC that was the language we read earlier: recognize all contributors to local history. The history of Clatsop County is multifaceted, etc. And then Todd made the recommendation and motion that we combine that goal with language suggested from the Southwest CAC, which is what is on the screen right now, that staff do the work of crafting language to incorporate the sentiments expressed in all of these goals, so that we would ask staff to take all of these and craft new goal policy, or using these ideas. Is that?
Nice try, but no cigar.
Okay. I'm happy to have someone else or even Todd restate the motion in case I'm not getting it.
Okay, I move that we have the staff review the recommendation of the Northeast and the Southwest committees, and to consider the requirements that Jim has proposed when writing up the summaries of these, and then that they be put together in the same format that we have here before us today, so that we can review them and approve them or not. That wasn't better. That was worse, wasn't it?
I'll still give you a cheroot for your try.
So let me restate it for Gail so that she can try to put something up on the worksheet, since Gail was away when the original motion came across. So we were discussing the goal language, which is now central on our screen in gold, for recognizing all contributors to local history, that language. Todd made a motion for staff to consider and combine this overarching goal language with the Southwest CAC suggested goal languages to create combined goal language that we could come back and review. And that was seconded by Cheryl. I will also note that that Jim suggested that SHPO may have recommended or required language that overlaps with some of the goals and policies suggested, I think especially in the Southwest language, and so that staff may want to incorporate any requirements there, predicting that we might become a CLG at one point and need to cooperate.
Yes, essentially just be informed by the the CLG when you rewrite these.
Thanks, Jim. Does that, Robert, at the third time of asking, does that do any better?
I'll give both you and Todd a salute for that.
Is there a discussion from the group on the motion as described? So is there any objection with us in going forward with this plan for goal language? Any objection? Okay, seeing none, hearing none. Gail, do you need any more direction on that? Does that make sense to you as described already?
Yep, that's very straightforward.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the next item is, and I'll say, I don't know, when I read these, I felt like the next two items actually were very close in my head anyway. But maybe they're sufficiently different that we need to piece them out separately. But the next item is adopting a local preservation ordinance. That was from Southwest. Todd, do you want to speak to this?
No, I think it's pretty much the same as the existing language.
Okay, and then Lewis and Clark. Andrea, are you back on the line by chance?
I am, yes.
So there's also, the next item is adaptive reuse of old and historic buildings, but it also contains language about preservation of historic buildings. So I wondered if these two fit together. I may be out on the limb there, but do you care to describe what the sense of your discussion was on this?
No, I don't recall anything beyond consider adopting local preservation ordinance is what the recommendation is. If you're
Okay.
asking.
Okay. Is there discussion or action from the group on adopting a local preservation ordinance? And we don't have to spell out an ordinance here, just about the, yes, Gail.
Okay. Also, this actually would tie in with the one about the certified local government. If we did become a certified local government, then we would be required at that point to adopt a local preservation ordinance.
Okay, thank you for that information, Gail. Jim?
Yeah, no, my thoughts are quite similar, is that we could use this as essentially a testing grounds for what would be good ordinance for the CLGs if they were approved. And if they're not approved, at least we have something that would essentially be a substitute for a CLG. So I think it's a good idea, and I would suggest the staff work on that, since I think they're the most knowledgeable people in the room.
Can you present that as a motion, Jim? And
I propose that the planning staff write draft ordinances for the local preservation, adopted local preservation ordinance. Make a first cut at the draft.
Thanks, Jim. Is there a second for staff making a draft for adopting a local preservation ordinance?
Yeah, I second it.
Thanks, Todd.
Todd.
Is there any discussion? Gail?
Okay, so I need a little bit of clarification so I understand. Are you asking for this to be the language for the policy in the comp plan that would be adopted in the next couple of years, or is this a motion saying that we should be doing that right now?
I think it should be part of this. I don't want to put another burden on you to have to do something immediately.
Well, I would probably make it lower on my list of priorities, but I was just looking for clarification about, is this a policy so that the policy would be, you know, even before pursuing CLG, that we should explore adopting a local preservation ordinance completely separate from the CLG process. Is that what I'm understanding?
Well, this is my personal opinion, is that we don't want to maybe place all our eggs in one basket, so that do pursue both essentially simultaneously. And if the CLG is approved, if this is written in such a way that it's SHPO compliant, then it would just be a matter of just maybe tweaking it or shipping it over as the ordinance for the CLG.
My recollection is that this was put in here because in anticipation of having a certified local government. So it was part of that package.
Well, it can be, to me, you can do it both ways. Originally, that's the way I thought of it when I first read this before the meeting. But since it's not, we don't really know if a CLG will be approved. Is this another mechanism to have something in place in case it's not approved? Because it is more laborious. There are other factors than just ordinances to be a CLG. I suppose this is really open for discussion for the group, but you know, how do we as a group want to approach this?
My impression was that it was a requirement to be a local certified government to have a preservation plan in place.
No, that's correct. But what I'm saying is, what I'm just throwing this out is that we could either say this is subservient to having a CLG, and if a CLG isn't approved, then we don't have any of these ordinances. That's one approach. The second approach is saying, essentially, well, we could come up with local preservation ordinances now that would be SHPO compliant, and if the CLG is not approved, we have something in place. If CLG is approved, then there are actually many other types of things, like the plan, like the historical design committee would have to be created as well. So you know, this might be a mechanism to help protect some of the historic sites and structures, regardless if a CLG is approved. That to me is what's on the table to discuss. How do we want to look at this?
And is that kind of regardless of what the people of the county want? Yeah, because that was kind of the object of the other approach of reaching out and finding out, is there a desire? And what I'm hearing is, well, just in case the answer is hell no, let's proceed and put something in there anyway without asking.
Well, no, there are other mandatory, there are other requirements if you are a CLG. This is one slice of that.
Jan.
I like that basic idea of going out and asking, testing the water prior to leaping to a conclusion.
This would be a way of testing the water, because we put something out there, you have a way that the public can respond to something instead of a nebulous nothing.
Okay, I've got Jan and then Gail.
Robert, the more standard way of getting a move in policy is to not to go to first to a public vote, but to put something in front of the elected officials and the appointed commissions then people come and talk about it and give their opinion. I think you put too great a burden if you're wanting a bunch of people who really don't know what we're talking about, don't particularly care, and put that up for a vote. I think
that's kind of the difference between a democracy and a republic.
Well, let's not put too much weight there. I mean, that's true, but we don't vote for everything that the county does. We don't have a public.
That's kind of how Jeff Stone used to run it. Since he was elected, he could decide what should be done, and you sure as hell don't want to.
But I'm not. I'm not somebody who pushes that kind of thinking. I'm just saying, in terms of if you really want to make some sort of progress on this, then you put it through the normal process. You don't make a referendum on it because.
But do you like referenda?
Hold up.
Do you like referenda, or do you just really like to avoid referenda?
I think
we're getting sidetracked here.
But this isn't it.
Gail, did you have comment?
Yeah, so I just want to remind you that when we looked at the policy about becoming a certified local government, we were very careful in our wording about making sure that we had public support behind us. If we were to become a certified local government, I imagine the part that people would find most objectionable would be the preservation ordinance itself. So I think that if you're going to recommend putting this policy into the plan and the policy about becoming a certified local government, I think they should be similar in how they're drafted, because this is the ordinance itself is the thing that is the bureaucratic layer, and creates the bureaucratic layer. So I think whoever said it, I think it was Mr. Strickland, that basically this would circumvent the desire of the community if there was not support for the local government. If you have this policy in that then says, well, despite that fact, we're going to still draft a preservation ordinance, I think you do have some sort of conflict there.
Okay. Is there further thank you, Gail. Is there further discussion on this motion, which is to have staff draft a preservation ordinance for this group? Okay. If there's no discussion, then we need to move to a vote on that. So all those in favor of instructing planning staff to draft a preservation ordinance, can you raise your hands at this time? So I see Jim, Pat, Todd.
I have my hand up.
Okay, so
yes.
Pat, Todd, Jim, Jan, all those opposed. Cheryl, Robert. Andrea, how do you vote on this?
Sorry, I couldn't figure out how to unmute myself earlier. I was going to vote yes.
Okay, thank you. So it looks, by my count, we're 5-2. 5-2 in favor of drafting. So is that, Jim, is that, well, first, Gail, is that fair enough as far as action needed by staff on this? Do we need more direction or anything?
No, and my understanding, just to be clear, is that this will be a recommended policy in Goal 5, not something that staff needs to immediately go out and do tomorrow morning.
That would be my understanding as well.
Okay, yeah, so we're clear.
Jim, did you have a comment?
Yeah, just a comment, Gail. I understand what you're saying. The way, we've had touched upon it a little bit in terms of this is just a portion of what is the requirements for a CLG. And to me, I would approach it as being a light touch rather than being too prescriptive or heavy-handed. That's the last thing we want to do at this particular point in time. And also whatever is done would also be within the framework of the CLG and that SHPO has online.
Okay, thank you, Jim.
Thanks, Jim. Okay, so the next item is from Lewis and Clark. And I'll just remind folks that we're coming up on our prospective time limit. That Lewis and Clark recommendation seems to me anyway to have a bunch of different general recommendations included in it. Andrea, do you care to speak to this one?
Andrea just left us.
Yeah.
I'm actually still here, but I was getting ready to sign off. I'm sorry. So let me look at it. We're still looking at.
We're looking at, this is the last item on the first recommendations page, blue worksheet. So it carries over onto the second page.
Gotcha. Would apply to buildings. I don't have any things other than that that's coming to my mind from our bigger group discussion last time.
Okay. Gail.
Yeah, so Andrea, if you're still there, I think some of the discussion, I think we used the example of the old AMCO site and the main boat building there. And, you know, how could you encourage buildings like that to be reused? And then I don't know if it came up in this policy, but also the need to have some sort of map to go with that. I think that was your group. But yeah, I think it centered more around AMCO.
Yeah, I think maybe a little better informed and would love to see a map or the inventory. I think was kind of where we were most curious. But I don't recall there being any like big passionate feelings about the issue.
Can Chinook chime in on Lower Columbia?
Mr. Aving, I might ask at this time, I apologize. I'm going to try to bulldoze our way through what we can of this and maybe come back to other items.
We only object to that where it says other tribes.
Okay.
And it should be Clatsop Chinook.
No, I appreciate that. I think we're going to look for unified language to use throughout the document, but we will come back to that. So rest assured that we'll try to make sure that we're consistent throughout. Okay. So thank you for bringing that up. I'm not necessarily hearing a distinct motion out of this one. Am I?
No recommendation is a perfectly fine recommendation.
Okay. Unless there's objection to the group, and feel free to, Jim. Jim.
No, I don't have any objection to it. Yeah, it's sort of a no-brainer. Unless you need something to really emphasize the fact that you don't want to try to lock an old building and keep it in mothballs. You would like to reuse it and have it be a meaningful contribution to society. I mean, is this something that really is, I guess my basic question is it understood that you would do this? Or do we even have to have a statement in it to emphasize the fact that it's okay to, or even desirable to, reuse old and historic buildings?
As I said, this is the part of the meeting where I start to push things through unilaterally. Can I suggest that if that sort of generic sentiment is desired, that we that you make a motion, that we ask staff to include that with the goal language, that we gave them a whole basket of goal language from Southwest and Northeast, that maybe reuse of historical buildings would be another item to add to that list.
That sounds great. I like that.
Is there a second for that motion? Okay.
Yeah, I second.
Is there objection to them adding that to the omnibus of goal language? Okay. Gail, can you add the reuse bit to the above?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next item is historic cemeteries. As I recall, this is when we were in the inventory section. We added this as something to come back and discuss. Anyone want to refresh my memory more on what we need to discuss here? Or do we want to come back to it in December when we talk about language? Hearing no other suggestion, I'm going to say that we try to gain clarity on this and come back to it when we take a few minutes to come back to goal 5 in December. Okay, we've got about 10 minutes left. Do we want to tackle these two, or do we want to try to go to public comment? I'll just poll the group on this. Do we think we can handle these two? These are staff recommended language here around a couple of pieces to address. There seems to be, I will say, reading the sentiment of the comments from the different groups, it's general support with the same concerns about inclusive language that we have already decided we're going to come back to in December to talk about that particular language bit. So I might make the suggestion that we also come back to these two items as well as the earlier policies so that we can settle on a language that works for all of them.
Yeah,
good. Is that amenable to the group?
Yeah, that's good.
Robert, is that okay for you? Okay. So Gail, we can come back to those two in December as well, if that's all right for staff. Okay, let me ask, is there public comment at this time? And if there is comment from the public, we only have about 9 minutes left, and we'll ask to limit, say, to 2 minutes of public comment each. No for you, Rachel. Chris, Carol, Mr. Abing, any of you have public comment at this time?
I found it all very interesting. That's my only comment.
Thank you, Mr. Farrar. Okay, are there any closing comments from the group or from staff?
Just a couple of comments quickly. We are looking at some possible workshops in November, online workshops with Dogami and Fish and Wildlife. No dates have been set, but those are on the horizon potentially. And then at your next meeting in November, which will be November 19th, you'll be going over the policies from the planning area committees dealing with groundwater resources. So.
Okay, thank you, Gail.
Yep.
Cheryl, did you have a comment?
Yeah, because we have a minute, I would just read what I wrote in the comments. All of you don't get a chance to read those. So what I wrote was, regarding cultural policies 1 and 2, those are the ones that we decided to come back and refer to in December. I support Todd's earlier suggestion of inclusive language. And as we think about this in the next 2 months, please keep in mind that it is not our role or our responsibility to determine historical correctness. Our focus continues to be the protection of lands and locations that need to be recognized and protected. I just wanted us to keep that in mind as we move forward in these next 2 months.
Gail.
Okay,
And
I
then-
forgot to,
Then Todd.
sorry, I forgot to ask quickly, is this format that we use today, does this work better for you? Are we good with it for at least next meeting and as we move forward?
Yes.
Okay, good, thank you.
I had one additional thing. We haven't talked about shipping or the sailing boats or the wrecks, and there are some significant shipwrecks in our county that we should probably call attention to. How do we fit that in?
Okay. I would suggest that since you're going to come back to historic and cultural resources in December, if you want to identify some, bring the shipwrecks that you're interested in, there is one on the National Register, and that's the wreck of the Isabella. But those are the only ones that I saw identified. They may be included perhaps in archaeological sites and not identified per se. So that would be something that maybe staff can look at between now and our December meeting.
Great, thank you, thank you.
You're welcome.
Does anyone happen to know, are the horse barn pilings in the Columbia recognized as being exciting stuff? You know, as you go across the big green bridge on the left side, I think, yeah, Jan knows. She's moving her lips mutedly. Okay.
I
Anyway,
think that's a good
if
call.
they're, you know, it's always fun going across the bridge and saying, hey, these are the pilings. Horses used to live there.
Yes.
Okay. She and Jan and Roger are going to go put the plaque up to memorialize them.
Okay.
You have longer legs.
If there is not further comment from the group, Jim.
One thing that we talked about earlier is Jan mentioned something about a small group to do some brainstorming on how to approach the educating. Really, it's an educational process of the different groups on the on the certified local government. I do think that a lot of time needs to be thought through how something like that, the rollout of an approach, so that we don't catch people by surprise. It's really an educational and education on both sides in terms of feedback from these various groups, that some of them of which we've identified already. It would be nice if we can do something like that. I don't know if it's within this group, sort of parallel to this group, working with Gail and her staff. I'm not too sure, but I don't want to lose sight of the fact that we don't want to surprise this on people. We need to do some forethought on how to present this.
Thanks, Jim.
All right, you need to think really carefully about what you're doing right now.
Gail? Hello, Gail?
Yes.
What time is the November 19th meeting?
It'll be at 1 p.m. and it'll be at the same meeting link that you used today. We use the same one over and over.
Okay. On the December meeting, what date and time is that?
Let's let's see. So for December, it would be December 17th at 1 p.m.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Jan, do you have a comment?
I was just going to say, if informally, if anybody wanted to sit down and talk about that suggestion that, there'd be like a little subgroup that would try to wrestle through this and bring something back, I'd be willing to participate in that.
Thank you, Jan.
Well, I certainly would be involved at all. Gail, do you like this approach? Do you support something like this?
I think you were a little bit far ahead in our thinking right now. I think we should be thinking about it. But first of all, we're about 2 years plus away from adopting this plan. We don't know what kind of support we'll have from the Board of Commissioners when we get to that point, or from the Planning Commission for that matter. So I think it's good to be thinking about it, but I wouldn't spend too much time forming committees and putting a process in place right at this moment in time, because we're very far ahead of the game and we don't know what's going to happen over the next couple of years. So as a planner, I'm telling you, don't plan yet. So.
Okay.
Okay, I think we have reached the end of our time anyway. So thank you all for your input today. Thank you to Rachel Jensen and Don Abing for expert testimony and feedback today. We appreciate that as always. To the members of the group, we'll see you all next month, I hope. Gail, we look forward to your correspondence. Thank you for your support today.
Okay, thank you, everyone.